How's everyone doing? Yeah, thank you. Oh, enthusiastic. Love that.
I like that.
So welcome to maybe the sexiest panel, not just participants, but in terms of topics. We're going to talk about affordability. A bit of a joke, but certainly something that we need to be paying more attention to in the industry. I read something from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition that in 2018, a renter that was working 40 hours a week, making minimum wage, could afford a typical two-bedroom apartment in exactly 0% of the counties in the country. So this is a huge problem. And if we talk to the economists at the National Association of Realtors, we find that we're deficient about 6.7 million units. So when we talk about these problems, it's not just a problem that affects low-income families. These are problems that are affecting people across the income spectrum. People are being priced out of markets in major cities, et cetera. I'm going to put Sarah on the spot as the expert in National Multifamily Housing Council to maybe give us some perspective as to what your organization thinks about this problem specifically.
Well, yeah, I mean, we dedicate a lot of time to this problem for sure. For the multifamily sector, we estimate that out till 2030, we need about 328,000 new units every year to keep up with demand. And we've only hit that level about 4 times since 1989. So this is a real problem. It's compounding, and we need to find ways to bring more units to market.
So, I mean, it's perfect. So people often say when they hear those stats, why don't you just build more, right? It's really not that easy. What are some of the restrictions, and this is for all of you, what are some of the restrictions in just building more affordable housing?
I mean, the list is so long. Where do you want to start?
Let's hit a few of them, yeah.
I'll start with zoning for sure. I mean, we can talk about, and I'm sure we are going to talk about a lot of different kinds of technology and innovation, but the zoning laws in the U.S. are archaic, to put it very bluntly, and they haven't been modernized. We're starting to see some cracks in that. We get very excited about things like we saw in Minneapolis, some of the news coming out of Oregon and California, where there's some efforts to upzone, because all these technology and innovations that we love to talk about really don't matter if we can't actually get the units built.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. There needs to be a better marriage between policy and technology as well. What other issues are standing in the way of building more units?
One of the issues that I see, I'm now at Sidewalk Labs, but I spent 15 years as a developer in New York City, where routinely we would have a building that had, say, 50 affordable units, and we would get like 30,000 applications for it. And in those same neighborhoods, when there was a project that was proposed, you would not just have the NIMBYs that you sort of learn to anticipate, those sort of wealthy, privileged people who are comfortable with things in their neighborhood that, weren't there before, but you were also starting to see more and more concern from the other side of the spectrum, people who say, like, this isn't affordable enough, and we're trying to use their sort of political power to say, like, we're going to oppose this project unless it is what we want. And in the end, what I've seen happen multiple times is, like, projects just don't happen. So I think that is a real challenge now. There's a real anti-development backlash. Developer has been sort of the villain for decades, but it's really strengthened in the last 5 to 10 years. And so when we think about technology that can align the developer and communities in new ways, I think that we need to sort of unlock that conversation.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've spoken about is capital. There's to develop affordable housing, there could be 5, 6 different layers of capital available from different sources, and something to bring that all together and ideally have it more free-flowing directly to projects. And I think Allison could speak to it. Our developers, when they have a new project coming out of the ground, are quite literally knocking on doors at different government offices or organizations looking for dollars to help finish the capital stack there. It's definitely something that technology can help with.
Yeah, that's great. Let's move to the construction process specifically. Considering the fact that construction globally is a $10 trillion market, 200 million people are employed in the construction industry worldwide. you'd think that we'd see a little more innovation, but I think the stat is that we've seen an increase in productivity of about 0.1% a year since 1947. You'd think that technology could really accelerate that. So let's go to the developer, and a number of you have development experience, but what technologies are you using specifically in the construction process where you're adding efficiencies to the process?
Yeah, we're kind of rethinking that right now on how we do that as a whole, from a twinkle in a developer's eye of a land parcel to finished residents moving in, and are kind of creating that workflow right now and exploring solutions here and talking about building our own, but really it's seamlessly being able to communicate for us between different groups. The front end development team communicating with the architectural design group, communicating with the capital markets group, communicating with leasing, our nonprofit partner on the project, all in one place, so everything's captured and we're not just dealing with 200 emails a day on a single project that's coming up to a critical date. I think there's a lot of space for improvement. It drives me nuts on how much paper I see when we go out to construction sites, and I think there's just in communication and transferring data between involved parties, there's a lot of benefit to be gained right now.
Yeah, it seems to be it's a disjointed process, right? Your experience as a developer, as an operator, et cetera, is not a good experience because of those things, because it's so disjointed. We like to talk about the fact that anytime there's paper and pen involved in any of these processes, it's a place that we should be able to innovate, considering where we are. What else are we seeing in terms of technologies that are helping impact the construction process or development process in a positive way?
Well, I'd like to pick up on Kunal's point about having disjointed processes. In real estate, I think that's what real estate is sort of conducting an orchestra of a lot of different peoples and fields and industries together. And one of the tools that Sidewalk Labs has is a generative design tool. If you have a large scale site, sort of like the business as usual is you have your master planner come in, they spend some time thinking about the site, and in your sort of general investment thesis, they come with 3 sort of like big ideas, big gestures. You sit around the table and say, I like this part, I like that part, this part makes sense. They go back for several weeks and come back with 2 versions that sort of amalgamate those. Meanwhile, your analyst has gone back and has tried to reiterate the numbers. They come to the meeting, they're like, oh, now everything's changed. I have to go back and iterate again. Your construction guy comes and he's like, oh, and now I have to rethink, my cost estimating again. And so you've got all of these groups that are coming to the table multiple times in like a slow iteration process. And the generative design tool creates one source of truth. Our tool, you upload the site, you upload the zoning constraints and the other aspects of it, and then you can prioritize what's important to you if it's affordable housing. And I think this is the other thing about affordable housing is it's competing with other asset types, with other desires, open space, views, things like that. So you put in your priorities and you rank them, and then you let the computer generate like literally thousands of different scenarios and spits out to you the ranking based on your priorities. But what's unique about Delve, which is our tool, is that it backends into a financial pro forma. So at the same time that you're seeing like, oh, this scenario produces 500 units of housing, this one produces 450 units, this one has a walkability score of X, this has a walkability score of Y, it's also giving you the return on investment, which is really important. So bringing together like those, the construction, costs, the analysts, the architectural ideas and things, I think will really be able to change the story when you're at the visioning sort of process prior to when you get into construction.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love those tools, and being able to see a number of different scenarios based on one specific site is really helpful. Let's touch on maybe some of these construction methods. I love 3D printing. I think it's fascinating. I will not bash 3D printing, but I'm not sure that that's going to solve any of our affordable housing, specifically on the multifamily side. When we're talking about verticality, I don't think 3D printing in the short term helps us solve those issues. So let's maybe focus more on modular construction, et cetera. What are you seeing in that space? What's interesting? How can it be applied specifically to multifamily and to resolving some of the problems that we see with affordability?
So my first project when I came to New York City as a young person, a long time ago now, was an affordable home ownership project that was made out of these volumetric modular shoe boxes made out of concrete in the Brooklyn Navy Yard and then shipped by barge to Far Rockaway. They're beautiful projects. I'm very proud of them when I go by, but it wasn't terribly efficient. And there are real limits to transporting volumetrically created modular housing. Sidewalk has done a lot of work around mass timber and has developed what we call like a kit of parts, which I liken most to Legos. I don't know if my colleagues appreciate that, but basically Legos that could be, cut using CNC, so high fidelity digital fabrication in an off-site location, flat packed, just similar to like IKEA furniture, and then shipped just about anywhere. So I think that that's like a really interesting approach to modularity to sort of take away sort of the volumetric and the big pieces. I've also done modular where it's like the dense glass and the steel tubing, and those also, there's transportation problems with those. There's levels of fidelity and assembly problems. So I think that is an interesting path forward. And the ideal is that because of the opportunity to prefabricate those parts before they get to the site, before the site's ready for them, and to not sort of miss a beat in the construction timeline, that we would be able to reduce the cost of construction to some extent, which would aid in affordable housing.
Yep, absolutely. I love that Lincoln log approach, by the way. Just out of curiosity, what are the height limits when you're dealing with kind of the timber side of that?
So Sidewalk Labs did a study, and I think that they chose, this was before I arrived, I joined about 9 months ago. I think they did a 35-story building.
Wow.
They didn't build it. They did the whole sort of process through construction documents to make sure that it could be approved and it would meet all sort of the structural and architectural requirements. The International Building Code of 2021, I think, allows for 18 stories. I think I saw New York City is about to permit 7 to 8 stories. We're a little bit behind here, but there are other cities in the U.S. that are doing up to 18 stories.
Interesting. You seeing anything that kind of grabs your attention in modulars?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the modular industry, there's some exciting things happening. Like, seeing the amount of money going into it, the companies that are expanding, that does help kind of address the issues of transportation. If you can have a plant in more places, well then, you improve access. But and I do think that even in the plants, like there's been a lot of improvements in the production, a lot more automation and robotics and things like that. So that part of the production has gotten definitely as advanced. But there's still those fundamental problems. But I think it is getting more interesting in a multifamily setting. Some of the kit work that you were talking about, like if you can have bathrooms that can be assembled in an hour versus everyone being a separate project, there's a lot of efficiencies to be had there in the construction timeline.
Yeah. Are you guys actually employing anything on the modular side with any of your developments? And it doesn't need to be on the affordable side. You're in student housing, military housing, et cetera.
Yeah. So we're starting to explore space, and like they're saying, having the amount of time it takes to assemble and use modular products or a kit to put together a kitchen, a bathroom, or an entire apartment's finishes has a lot of value. And so we're experimenting in different places. We've to date taken the more traditional or older school approach to construction, but are starting to dip our toes in there, and really tying it together with sustainability goals that we have, developing net zero projects in on-campus universities on campus, for military housing and public housing. So we're using the sustainability door as kind of our approach to walk into more modular type construction.
Let me ask this. Considering kind of the shift we're seeing with the way people are working, and the fact that you've got this hybrid approach to office, et cetera. Do you think that alleviates any of the problem we've got with housing, specifically in city centers, when you've got people working remotely, they don't have to be in the city, et cetera? Or does that just create a different problem relative to affordability? If you have the ability to not have to work in the city where you've got a lack of units, et cetera, have we put any thought into how kind of this shift in terms of the way people are working, does that help with this, or does it just create a different set of problems?
That's a heavy subject. So a lot of what our portfolio is low-income housing tax credit development projects, and so a very large percentage of our resident base didn't get time off or get to work from home. They were in essential worker capacities, whether it was in the food, distribution, medical, and so for us, it was a major challenge at some of our properties where the parents needed to be at work, and there was childcare issues created as a result of schools being closed last year. And so for us stepping up and being a solution with some of our service provider partners, and providing meals to those kids, providing them with some activities to do throughout the day, still helping them be, move forward from an educational perspective. So it's really created a different kind of challenge than I think a lot of people would have anticipated. On the other hand, we have a lot of senior properties, and the seniors really rely on services to bring them to the grocery store, to bring them to their medical appointments, and really relied upon social activity with other residents in their community, which was lost. So our team really had to find a lot of creative ways using technology, whether it was just as simple as a Zoom video conference or Zoom bingo, or getting kids into a room on their own, using tools that we've put in front of them to continue to learn and be occupied during the day. So it's been challenging. It's been entirely different scope than a lot of our on-site team has been used to dealing with. But thankfully we were able to step in where we could.
Yeah, Sarah, have you guys thought about this in terms of where people are living, where they're working, and how that impacts kind of housing in general?
Absolutely. We are doing some research around that. We do our biennial resident preferences survey, and we are asking a lot more questions this time about their work from home experience and expectations and usage also, because through the pandemic, this has definitely highlighted that it's not just about entertainment. Learning happens, health consultation happens, social interaction happens, working happens. So there's no doubt that the importance of connectivity in a multifamily setting has come into high relief, and I think it's sort of that question about like digital divide, and has always been kind of entwined with the affordable housing conversation, but it's definitely even more important now. And I think the expectations around that kind of connectivity across different multifamily asset types is without question going to be more important going forward.
Yeah. What are you guys seeing at Sidewalk?
Well, we're really interested in how hybrid work will impact the demand for office space, what people will want the office space to look like. When you asked that question, I was thinking about Hudson's portfolio, which is a company that I came from, having done 15 years of development there, and I still sit on the investment committee, and I was thinking anecdotally about some of the buildings in a portfolio that I used to manage, which I would describe as middle income housing. It's market rate, but it's outer borough housing. And prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic, for sure, we were offering pretty substantial concessions on a year's lease. And recently, the director of leasing told me they're offering no concessions on that building at all. And so what that sort of suggests to me is that it's only one data point, and I don't know what it's like in other cities, but people who may have left are back. And I think that goes maybe to Sarah's point that there's a lot more that happens in your community, that some people prefer to live outside of the city now that they can, but there's a lot of people who either need to live in the city for their jobs as they're essential workers, or who enjoy the life of the city and they have opted to stay. I think there's the reason we have an affordability problem is there's so much more demand than supply. So even with the shift of some supply, which may have accelerated, I think, some trends for some people who were already likely to leave, I don't think that it's had such a massive impact that it will reshape where we need affordable housing. That's really a guess, though.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So there's, you all made a few points, and I want to ask the next question. There's been a shift in the conversation around affordability, where we used to talk about basic shelter. Now we're moving into quality of life, those types of things. I actually think that you guys have a great tagline at Michael's, which is you're building communities to lift lives, right? So when we talk about the quality of life, livability, et cetera, what are some technologies that you're seeing that can actually be employed in some of these affordable developments or affordable communities? And it's not just the home itself, but it's the entire community, the building, whatever it might be. But what are you seeing in terms of technologies that are focused on increasing the quality of life in these developments specifically?
We're seeing telehealth coming in big. The pandemic sort of brought this in high relief, but in a lot of these communities, we have members that are in their communities just making that a core part of their, if you will, amenity package or service platform.
I think two things come to mind for me. One is Ori, which is a company that Sidewalk Labs is an investor in. You can go to their website, oriliving.com. It's totally worth it. They're into transforming space. And so I take this sort of affordability by design approach. Basically, it's robotic furniture. It takes the Murphy bed, which is old-fashioned. It comes down from the wall, and when you want to put it back, you have to make your bed and do all these straps and things and push it up and then rearrange the bookshelves, and makes it quite seamless and quite beautiful, where you push a button or you say, Alexa, Google, whoever your robot of choice is, please lower the bed, and the bed comes down. And below the bed can be a workspace or it can be a kitchen table. And the idea there is that a developer who, say, has 650 square foot one bedrooms that are at a certain price point can replace those with studios, but utilize this robotic furniture. They also have they call it pocket office, which is basically an office that takes up very little square footage because it emerges with the press of a button and also retracts. They have pocket closet, which creates a walk-in closet that also basically disappears. And through the use of these pieces of furniture, you could then create the same sort of sense of living, the same living space in 500 square feet. So the developer then can take a floor plate, remove the 650 square foot units, put in a bunch of 500 square foot, so you get more units. You charge less per unit than you would for a one bedroom, more than you would for a studio, because this is a fancy studio. So at the end of the day, the developer's taking home more than they would have without this Ori product. But the tenants, there's more units that are available at a more affordable price point. So that's one aspect where you're really using technology, robotics, versus software. It's more of a hardware solution. And then the other is an area, I think, of incredible opportunity that my team, which is the advisory and development team at Sidewalk, is really looking into, and that's community wealth vehicles. I think what I'm most interested in are opportunities to align commercial real estate with communities in a more positive way. So this doesn't go to the quality of life of walking down the street and such, but it does say to people, if there's a new building in your neighborhood and you can invest in it through, for example, a neighborhood REIT, Nico, which we're also an investor in. I always feel like I have to give that disclaimer. As the value of that property and therefore the neighborhood improves, instead of just being on the sidelines watching that happen, to the extent that you're able to afford shares, I think shares it's $100 for 10 shares. You can participate in that upside by having a quarterly dividend. So it's that's just one example, and I think there's other opportunities for tech to sort of create replicable, scalable models to improve the way that communities experience development, which will in turn improve their quality of life and hopefully make them more supportive of the development that we need in order to attack the affordable housing crisis in the first place.
I love that. You kind of endear the community to the development itself. Sometimes they're viewed as negative developments, but if you can get the community involved in terms of what that looks like, potentially the upside associated with some of those developments, I love the fact that it might bring the entire community a bit closer together. You mentioned your experience in kind of senior living. We work with ARP and their Age Tech Collaborative. Are you seeing anything in terms of the way that you're developing those types of properties or managing those types of properties for seniors? Because really affordability, again, it's not just based on income or age, et cetera. It's, again, across the entire spectrum.
Yeah, what we found with the senior population is they really focus on being social. They want to interact with one another. They want to communicate with one another. And so we're looking into ways, given the world that we're in, that they're able to continue to communicate with one another from their smartphones, getting smartphones into hands, getting Wi-Fi into those buildings, so they have a seamless and quick and easy way to communicate, coordinate, and go and hang out and socialize, and also creating spaces outdoors for them for them to be able to do exactly that.
Yeah, are we seeing more go into kind of the urban studies and the planning components with some of these affordable developments? You see that? I mean, are we seeing a little more thought in terms of like common spaces? Again, in the past, it's like, let's put as many as we can. We're thinking about, basic dwellings. It's just for shelter. Are we seeing better planning in terms of the spaces themselves? And I'm talking common spaces, the outdoor spaces, et cetera.
I think there's a lot more blurring between that traditional public and private space. And this is happening not just in the affordable space, but in multifamily in general, for sure. This is why the coffee shop, that's such a great anchor in your community because it brings the residents together. Well, now that's open to the public where, up until a few years ago, we were all about controlling the access and not letting the people in to enjoy our gardens or whatever it is that we are building to kind of add to the community. It's not, there's a much greater openness now. And I do think that is going to be helpful kind of going forward when we're talking about, equity and community development.